Welcome to Pandemic Boys and Girls. Are we having fun yet? My name is Major Mike Webb, and I am running for U.S. Congress in Virginia's 8th Congressional District. And I am currently spending quite a lot of time in the courts. So, welcome to Evolving Science, a term with which many have come to embrace during a global public health crisis, in which, according to the most recent update from the WHO, as of 16 January, over 323 million confirmed cases and over 5.5 million deaths have been reported worldwide, which is just a 500,000 short of the Jewish people who were exterminated in the Holocaust. Robert Kennedy Jr. was recently criticized by the Auschwitz Memorial for his reference to the Holocaust and what were described as anti-Semitic remarks, which is quite a shameful position when you are called to the carpet and held accountable by those who have pledged publicly and ceremoniously never to forget. But still, most people would agree that that Holocaust was not a good thing, that it should have been avoided, and that persons like Adolf Hitler and Adolf Eichmann were not good people. And during his trial, Adolf Eichmann, before the Attorney General in Israel in April 1961, that court had concluded that Adolf Eichmann, who had evaded capture for 15 years, even secretly entering the country of Argentina to obtain what he hoped would be immunity from extradition, having escaped Nazi Germany, would be held accountable because even though he had not personally taken the life of even one person, undoubtedly he knew the value of the tale about administration of tonics to which he put his signature. Knowledge. And in the law, even though it is often said that mere ignorance is not an excuse, there are duties and obligations that arise upon acquisition of knowledge. The smarter you are, the more you have to do. Noblesse oblige. And in 1873, in the case of Cordova v. Hood, was laid down the rule by the Supreme Court that means of knowledge, with the duty of using them, are in equity equivalent to knowledge itself. Not just as Senator Howard Baker had asked during the Watergate hearing, how much did the president know and when did he know it, but simply that the means of knowledge, the ability to know, defeating any attempts at willful blindness, imposes a duty to do something with that knowledge, particularly in the case of conspiracy law, where the Eighth Circuit stated in Lutheran v. U.S. in 1937 that participation in the formation of a conspiracy is not even essential to culpability if after it was formed, the defendant aided or abetted with an understanding of its purpose. So a prudent person would probably wish to avoid waking up surprised, like Lieutenant William Kelly, who had claimed that he was only following orders because the Military Court of Appeals during his general court-martial in 1973 laid down the rule that the acts of a subordinate done in compliance with an unlawful order given him by his superiors are excused and impose no criminal liability upon him unless the superior's order is one which a man of ordinary sense and understanding would, under the circumstances, know to be unlawful, or if the order in question is actually known to the accused to be unlawful. And you look like an intelligent person. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., in his famous letter from a Birmingham jail written on April 16, 1963, had stated that we should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal. And he goes on to say memorably in words to history that it was illegal to aid and comforted you in Hitler's Germany. And he goes on to state that even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at that time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. And he concludes in words that may speak to today. If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocate disobeying that country's anti-religious laws. Quite a few people quote Dr. King when they want to do something. And we just finished celebrating the birthday of Reverend King. But who most say they may wish to emulate may find it an interesting fact here on this point is that Reverend King, while certainly a remarkably gifted orator and famous civil rights leader, was not an attorney. And sitting in a Birmingham jail, he may not have had access to an extensive law library, attorney on speed dial. So we can forgive this point on the rationale that he did, under the rules stated in Cordova v. Hood, not possess the means of knowledge. And you should have enough common sense not to stroll into a courtroom and say something ludicrous like, well, you know Dr. King said, because the judge is going to tell you that Dr. King is not an attorney or qualified to prefer a legal opinion as an expert. You never want to be standing in a courtroom like the attorneys for Pastor Hemming Jacobson in the 1905 quote-unquote vaccine case that arose after he had refused to accept the free vaccine in Cambridge, Massachusetts, taking his case all the way to the United States Supreme Court, where Justice John Marshall Harlan began that legal opinion, stating in the very first sentence, "We pass without extended discussion the suggestion that the particular section of the statute of Massachusetts now in question, Section 137, Code 75, is a derogation of rights secured by the preamble of the Constitution of the United States. There are no rights guaranteed in the preamble." In his last famous speech, Reverend King takes his audience of ministers of the gospel, who he had described glowingly then as a marvelous picture, through 8 years of civil rights history that would not have occurred had he found cause or need to sneeze, after he had been stabbed in Harlem by what he had described as a deranged black woman who had punctured his chest with a letter opener. And he says that one little white girl, ninth grader at the White Plains High School, wrote to him in a letter that he would never forget that she was so glad that he did not sneeze, because had he sneezed, that blade that had punctured his chest would have ruptured his aorta. And that is just the interview, as he noted in that speech, in which he had come to the conclusion, nonetheless, that he was no longer afraid of any man, that longevity had its place. And that didn't matter now. But had he the means of knowledge, sitting alone in a Birmingham jail, engaged in a dangerous selflessness and a relevant ministry, writing long letters, thinking strange thoughts, and praying long prayers, Dr. King would have become aware, woke to the fact that during the 1961 trial of Adolf Eichmann, the Attorney General, an attorney, had anticipated that the accused might try to escape again and try to argue ignorance of the laws of Israel before the claim of only following orders. And so, not quoting from the law of world tribunals or Mosaic law, or even the laws that had been passed by the government of the state of Israel, chose a quotation from a prior case that had arisen under German military law. Very clever. And the Eichmann trial court observed there that the distinguishing mark of a manifestly unlawful order should fly like a black flag above the given order as a warning reading prohibited. Not mere formal illegality, hidden or half-hidden, not the kind of illegality discernible only to the eyes of legal experts, but a flagrant and manifest breach of the law, certain and necessary illegality appearing on the face of the order itself. The clearly criminal character of the order or of the acts ordered, an illegality clearly visible and repulsive to the heart, provided the eye is not blind and the heart is not stony, and the corrupt, that is, the extent of manifest illegality required to release a soldier from the duty of obedience upon him and make him criminally responsible for his acts. It may not have a post-it on it that says prohibited, but you should know it when you see it, like love at first sight. So before you get yourself embarrassed by quoting Dr. King on that point of law, please take note that it was not illegal, that it was not legal to do what Hitler or Eichmann did, even in Nazi Germany. As the song says, don't go to bed with a price on your head. No, don't do it. And nobody's perfect. So you got to look out, perhaps, right? But let's move on. On March 11th, 2021, marking the anniversary of the WHO declaration of a pandemic, which is not a term that describes lethality or even contagiousness, and only a statement of a fact that a disease is present all over the world, with not even a standardized or quantifiable metric with which to gauge. The president addressed the nation, stating ceremoniously, "A year ago, we were hit with the virus that was met with silence and spread unchecked. Denials for days, weeks, then months that led to more deaths, more infections, more stress, and more loneliness." The president continued this speech and had reminded all Americans in a speech where he assured us that he was going to tell us the truth, looking us in the eye and saying, "We've lost so much over the last year. We've lost family and friends. We've lost businesses and dreams we spent years building. We've lost time with each other. And our children have lost so much time with their friends, time with their schools. No graduation ceremonies this spring, no graduations from college, high school, moving up ceremonies." And it is true that those things did in fact occur, as most will agree. Just as it is true that there was a virus that was met with silence and spread unchecked. And unchecked indeed it was, for on September 16th, 2021, Christian Andersen, the author of one of the most often cited references for the claims of a zoonotic origin, the proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2, which had been published in the journal Nature Medicine, a science journal that you should have read in pandemic, on March 17, 2020, had joined 20 other scientists in a report published in Cell Review that had concluded that failure to comprehensively investigate, perform due diligence, the zoonotic origin through collaborative and carefully coordinated studies would leave the world vulnerable to future pandemics arising from the same human activities that have repeatedly put us on a collision course with novel viruses. But perhaps some people spent more time focusing on other things like elections or tearing down statues or whatever cause they took up during a pandemic when this zoonotic source was undiscovered. Christian Andersen himself, along with his colleagues, on January 31st, 2020, the very, very beginning of the public health crisis in America, having arrived January 14th, 15th, and reported on January 20th, 22nd, had concluded after examining the genome under a microscope, which most of us don't do, that the features potentially looked engineered. And in that email to Dr. Anthony Fauci, the president's top medical advisor, had stated that it was the professional expert opinion of himself and his scientific colleagues that they found the genome inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory. But by February 4th, 2020, he had suddenly changed his mind in an evolving science, ever-evolving science, and dismissed his former conclusions by describing such an idea as a crackpot theory, and decided immediately, along with colleagues in the science community, to dedicate deliberate efforts to challenge and defeat the emergence of such claims, such shiny objects as described by Dr. Fauci. From opponents to the newly embraced theory regarding a zoonotic origin, wittingly or unwittingly accepting the opportunity cost and trade-off externalities to which he now concedes have left the world vulnerable to future pandemics, arising from the same human activities that have repeatedly put us on a collision course with novel viruses. Well, first of all, let's talk about novel viruses. Viruses are the most abundant biological particles in the world. Before the current pandemic or public health crisis, there are only 220 harmful to mankind. Do the math. There are no great threats from viruses emerging. A common phrase, though, in pandemic is that people are following the science. And conversely, those who reject the science are simply not behaving rationally in a public health crisis, which is an argument that certainly appeals to common sense. And all scientists know that reproducibility and replicability are fundamentally important aspects of the scientific method. Robert Gerlach used that very sentence as his introduction to an article he had published in March 2019, before any pandemics, in the Pharmacology, Biochemistry, and Behavior Journal. But when it comes to this future of pandemics arising from the same human activities that have repeatedly put us on a collision course with novel viruses, about which Christian Anderson did not become concerned until September of 2021, there have been no reports of any replicated zoonotic evolutions of this novel coronavirus, which a scientist like Thomas Kuhn, a former professor at Berkeley, MIT, and Harvard universities, would describe as an anomaly. And in his work on science structure of scientific revolutions, first published in 1962 with a fourth edition published in 2012, he observed as a scientist that one thing that keeps scientists busy in normal science is working on resolving those anomalies. Accordingly, Kuhn posited that to be accepted as a paradigm, you all know about paradigmatic shifts, to be accepted as a paradigm, a theory must seem better than its competitors, but it need not, and in fact never does, explain all the facts with which it can be confronted. Yet still the goal in science and these scientific methods to develop a unified theory that resolves most anomalies, because the theory that accomplishes this goal is probably the most correct one. And the history of science and scientific revolutions is this pattern of presenting paradigms that collide with anomalies in revolution and are resolved through new unifying theories, a process to which most are introduced in grammar school, simply watching the Newtonian concepts of physics transformed in a nuclear age to incorporate the ideas of scientists like Fermi and Einstein, a process with which even Galileo was familiar when he said, "I stand on the shoulders of giants." And some might describe the current public health crisis as such a scientific revolution. For on October 8, 2021, 1 month before the emergence of the Omicron variant of concern, and still grappling with the Delta variant of concern, estimated to be up there with 90% infectious chickenpox and measles, leaving you not much further to go, despite claims that the Omicron variant is 4 times more infectious. The most contagious viruses known to mankind, chickenpox and measles. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky, a doctor, stated the virus isn't stupid. But she did not stop there. Dr. Walensky went on to state what we can't really predict is human behavior. And human behavior in this pandemic hasn't served us very well. So, Dr. Walensky said this virus is not stupid and on all evidence has been very successful, but our humans following the science and focused upon midterm elections are not performing well on this science midterm exam. A natural selection in which we may reasonably assume has elected to abstain and not even join those who wish to vote in the coming year like democracy depended on it, and rather is sticking to its priorities of survival, domination, and terror, and postponing your going back to your adventurous life until after your pandemic. As of January 16th, over 323 million confirmed cases and over 5.5 million deaths have been reported worldwide. On June 9th, 2021, I was in a school board race in Arlington in which the Arlington GOP elected to pass on endorsing a candidate. Despite issues of critical race theory, one of the first executive orders signed into law in the current gubernatorial administration, and also reopening schools. They passed, while the Arlington Sun-Gazette had declared that although Mary Cadera still had a race to run, it was the beginning of her coronation in June 2021, which indeed did come to pass. And parents in Arlington must now accept their choices for reopening public schools safely, because the people have spoken. You have voted, and you are adults of age to vote. On July 6th, one day before I had filed an action in the U.S. District Court in Richmond, The WHO reported the cumulative number of cases reportedly globally now exceeds 183 million, and the number of deaths is 4 million. We've lost 1.5 million people between then and now. On March 23rd, when the White House acknowledged receipt of the FOIA request I had submitted, seeking only an answer, yes or no, as to whether the infectious dose and secondary attack rate for COVID-19 was classified information, the world count was only 2,703,780. Almost 1/3 of where it is now. I based my questions upon my knowledge as the most junior commissioned officer to have ever served as the operations officer for all Army Strategic Counterintelligence in the continental United States, or CONIC, who helped to establish the intelligence organization that was supposed to have alerted the former president. And even if that was not an option for voters in Arlington during a school board race where they were trying to reopen schools safely for their kids, not mine. My means of knowledge imposed yet a duty to ask the question. It is an important question because under Executive Order 12958, those metrics could only be classified information if the government, our government, owns the causative biological agent for COVID-19, which would mean that there is no zoonotic source about which Christian Anderson or any other scientist need be concerned, even if Fauci says it's there. Nor is there any question that the president need task the intelligence community to answer and resolve, as had been done back in May, after this request had been submitted as a FOIA. A matter now on application to the Chief Justice to compel the White House to respond, and a matter not reported by any reporter in the press. On the U.S. v. Gwynn, decided by the Eighth Circuit in 1915, there must, in addition to such knowledge or approval, be voluntary, willing, knowing, and intentional cooperation or agreement to cooperate before there can be any conspiracy, normally established through circumstantial evidence, because most people don't write down in a contract, yes, I'm joining the conspiracy. Voluntary, willing, knowing, and intentional agreement to cooperate. And in order to show withdrawal from your quid pro quo agreement, the defendant must show that he has committed affirmative acts inconsistent with the object of the conspiracy that are communicated in a manner reasonably calculated to reach conspirators. U.S. v. Heard, decided by the Fifth Circuit in 2013, and quoting a long line of cases dating back to 1994, stated that proposition. Mere cessation of activity and furtherance of the conspiracy or silence is not sufficient to show withdrawal, but requires affirmative acts. And under U.S. v. Heard, with a death toll peaking over 5.5 million, on a collision course with 6 million, my friend, this is one of those rare instances in the law where you may have a right to remain silent, but also thereby elect to aid and abet in a conspiracy. And I do not wish, personally, to disturb or dissuade you from making your freely elected and voluntary informed choice. I'm not your mama. Your bodies and your choice. This briefing is unclassified. My name is Major Mike Webb, and by God, I am running for U.S. Congress. Honest. Carry on.
We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. Soldiers of the cross. Every run goes higher, higher. Every run goes higher, higher. Every run goes higher, higher. Soldiers of the cross. Sinner, do you love your Jesus? Sinner, do you love your Jesus? Sinner.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
Jesus, soldiers of the cross. Sinner, do you love your Jesus? Sinner, do you love your Jesus? Sinner, do you love your Jesus? Soldiers of the cross.
Thunk, I could have had a vaccine.